Okay, let's imagine that there's a zoo. So you go and you attend this zoo and you pay to get in, and you go to the different exhibits, right? There's usually like the different regions, but in this case, it's other people that you're watching. So there's a room where people are just walking around the mall shopping, for example. You're just watching them go about their thing and pick out items and purchase them and come and go. Or there's an office, and there's people sitting there, at their desk doing their work or having meetings in the conference room. And there's like a gym, people working out. There's maybe some attractive ladies, getting ready, getting dolled up, making sure they look good, or some rugged guys just kind of doing their thing, chopping wood, going camping, you know, something like that. It's kind of like these exhibits, right? It feels a lot like different YouTube channels. And then you kind of get to this one section and you walk in and it feels a little different. And when you get in there, there's just me here sitting and I'm watching you. I see the people come by and they're all staring, and here I am just watching you back. Why does that feel so different? Why does that feel so invasive in a way? Why do we fear being watched and looked at? It's kind of like a strange thing, right? Because why should it matter? Like, and think in public spaces, when you're on the train or on the street or something, you kind of, for the most part, know that people don't really care. They're kind of just minding their own business. Or most people are, and most people kind of keep to themselves and try not to stir anything up. Um, but in a way, when we do that as well, we're not really engaging. We're kind of just like withdrawing, and there's sort of this unspoken rule, kind of like in school, and everyone has the same question, but nobody like actually puts their hand up to ask it. And it's kind of a weird phenomenon. But somehow we're all generally scared of being looked at and being watched. I think that one of the top fears in the world is not, jumping out of a plane or climbing a giant skyscraper, even though it looks really scary. It's actually being on stage and performing in public. So I wanted to delve deeper into that. I'll start with this artist. Forgot her name, but the artist was present. There is present was the name of the exhibit, and she made an exhibit that was just like this strange zoo that I was talking about. She sat in an open space, and any of the patrons that came into the gallery was welcome to sit across from her. And that's kind of all it was. It sounds kind of pretentious. It seems kind of like one of those artsy things where it's like, what's the point? What's the deal? Um, and lots of people came. It was pretty popular, but not a lot of people dared to like sit in the chair in front of her. She was just there. But the ones that did, a lot of them started to get emotional. And you would think that, it's some gimmick or it's because there's crowds of people watching, so they're playing along or something like that. But I don't think any of that is really true. I think that we spend so much of our lives trying not to be seen, trying not to look at others, that when you're given this opportunity to simply sit here and be seen, just as you are. It's sort of exceptional. It's not normal, which is strange to think about because we all look at each other and we all have people we care about, right? In some sense, or we want connection. That's sort of generally the human thing. But we do spend a lot of our time hiding who we are, hiding from ourselves, hiding from others, not wanting to be seen. And when someone actually does finally see you, it's sort of a very validating feeling. Um, there's another experiment. There's sort of a psychology documentary that I liked watching by a neuroscientist. And one of the experiments was similar. It's about being looked at. But this one was obviously a little bit more playful. And so they had a storefront with a shopping window. And they basically just set it up with a curtain and a chair. And they invited participants, like volunteers, to simply just sit in the chair in the window to be looked at by the public. And they wanted to see how their like heart rate and their physiology would respond. So they started off with some adults, and obviously, you know, I'm 40 years old, and I still feel a little bit nervous being watched and being on camera. And yeah, it's uncomfortable, but I've also played in open mics and things like that, and so I have like a little bit of exposure. And also, when I was in class, I actually did put up my hand and ask the questions that everybody was thinking, but nobody wanted to ask. Um, but growing up, I was actually quite shy, so I was really nervous. But now that I'm older, it's a little bit easier. So all these other adults had an easier time with it. They were uncomfortable, but it was okay. But then they put the teenagers in the chair, and their heart rates just like spiked. They were like, their heart was racing, almost like they were panicking. Um, and it's interesting because the point they were trying to make is that in the teenage years is when we start to care a lot more about how other people see us. So some part of their brain or something about them is heightened, and they're overly aware of everyone looking at them and watching them. And so it makes sense that they're sort of hyper aware, and that they, yeah, they're sort of freaking out basically in the window, because it is a weird situation. We don't really do that very often. And I think that's why people like don't want to generally stand out or perform, because it kind of delves deeply into that fear. And it's a weird thing to think about why it matters so much. But in every part of our world and our society, we are looked at. I guess we're in this stage right now where, like what I'm doing, making videos, and people are actually like putting their voices out in public or commenting and things like that. But even before then, there were um, sort of like a public pressure. There maybe always has been. Um, to say religion, for example. I'm not a religious person. I didn't grow up in religion, but I do know that um, a lot of religions basically have an all-seeing, all-knowing God, or even the idea of Santa Claus or something like that, who is just watching you to see if you're doing good or bad things, and whether you get rewarded or not. That's a lot of how our society is built. A lot of peer pressure. I would guess that people in religious settings, um, they do kind of have this mentality. It's not just a religious thing, it's a group mentality of, when you follow the group and their sort of ways that are acceptable, you are allowed to participate in that group, and you're allowed, like you're invited in, and you're treated as one of the kin. But as soon as you sort of break any ranks, or question things. Um, there's sort of this sharp boundary of either you're in or you're out, the insiders versus the outsiders. We also structure a lot of our work this way. Like how often do we get, performance reports and there's all these analytics and quarterly things, and there's always someone sort of looking over you to make sure you're doing your job, generally speaking. And it's the same deal. It sort of trickles down. This idea of, you know, people make sure you're doing your work, and if you're not doing it, you kind of get warnings, or you get punished, or you get let go eventually. Whereas on the flip side, when you're doing well, or you do exceptional, or you do extra work, you may get rewarded eventually, or you might get, like a thumbs up or something, a little kudos. But generally, the punishments outweigh the rewards by a lot. So there's almost like not a lot of incentive to again, stick your neck out. You just kind of do enough. You kind of know your place, kind of thing. And that's how a lot of our world is built. But you kind of go back even further before we're kind of adults and out in the world and in schools and around so many people. You are like with your family. And it makes me wonder how much of this fear of being looked at really starts from there. And this might sound harsh in some sense, but I've noticed it's like a common occurrence. But a lot of parents, maybe because they already have this sort of fear internalized and whatnot, they have these strong expectations for who their children are supposed to be. They have these ideas of how, someone's supposed to grow up and what's successful and all of that jazz, and what's unacceptable, what's embarrassing, what's shameful. And you would like to believe that, like a newborn infant is sort of free from judgment. Maybe they are when they're first born, but they are at the mercy of their caregivers and how they think about them and how they treat them automatically, in some sense, places a kind of pressure and a kind of direction on who they should become. I think like an ideal parent, in a sense, will just let their kids evolve and be who they want to be and let them make their own mistakes. But more often than not, I've noticed that there's this general idea of like pressuring and sort of nudging and shaping kids to be a certain way. So it makes me wonder that even before the school age, before we start having grades and all the weirdness and sort of cruelty of kids sometimes, they're also very sweet. But there's, yeah, once you start kind of going into the world, into school, there's this other social pressure. So even long before they hit those teenage years, when they start really, really like wondering about their self-image and worrying a lot about it, and sort of transferring that up into adulthood, I kind of wonder if that's already built in from the home environment, and how there's sort of like these unwritten house rules or inherited things from religion and beliefs and personal experiences that are already sort of placed onto children. So there's already kind of this social pressure that you can't get away from. It just sort of compounds until we get to this societal level where we're just like, we don't know how to behave. We don't know what's appropriate in which setting, because there's so many different ways and so many different pressures that can go against you. And I think this all kind of leads back to this idea of authenticity. A lot of people give this advice of just be yourself, when you go on dates, when you go on interviews, just have a conversation, just like take it easy, don't make it a big deal. But it's difficult when you've kind of went through all of these scenarios and you're never quite sure how to be. Then you start questioning who is really yourself and what are you supposed to be doing. Um, and there's a lot of this sort of reflective feedback as well. When we are out in the world or in the job or the school or whatever, and we choose not to be seen, or we don't want to be seen or looked at. That feeling like on the train or the bus again, like everyone's just sort of minding their own business. We kind of have this unspoken rule, just like don't don't do anything weird, essentially. But I feel like when we shut down that of being looked at, of standing out, we also shut down the feeling of looking at others. So that art exhibit, I think, was really powerful because it gave people the chance not for the artist to see them or them to see the artist. It's that they can see one another without any preconceived notions, without preconceived judgments, of just simply seeing whoever they are in that moment for as long as they are willing to sit there together. And I think that's what it really provided. Because how often do we like really do that out in public? Or I would argue even in all of our institutions of like our workplaces, even on dates and schools, like how often are we showing up as ourselves, and how often are we looking at others as themselves rather than what we wished that other person would be or what we wished that we were. And I think that that's kind of the society that we live in, unfortunately. It's strange that online, on the internet, that we are so quick to judge and watch others. We do flip through this human zoo of channel, 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 they're a certain kind of actor, or they're not, or they are this personality, they are trustworthy scientific explainers, these people are quacks, or these people are fun, these people are boring. And we like comment on each other. It reminds me of this article that I read years ago that really stuck with me. And there was this idea that in this modern world, the online world, there is no more God, so to speak, watching and judging us because we are doing that now. We are watching and judging and commenting and criticizing one another all the time and putting all of this pressure, and we don't know how to navigate it anymore. And um, I think it's like a huge part of the spike in anxiety, because everywhere you feel like you're being judged and you're being watched, and everything can be recorded now. But even in spite of all that, we're not really like trying to see the person that's like underneath all the actions, all of the production, all the edits and the graphics and all of that, and the platforms. Because at the root of it, we're not a character, we're not like a persona. We are just whoever we are, with the feelings and thoughts and experiences and memories that we carry. And that's it. Um, but I don't know how we can get better at that. without actually being willing to look at ourselves for who we are, throw away all the expectations and the characters and the things that we're supposed to be. Just look at yourself for who you are. And then, only then, I think we can look at others for who they are. You still watching? Okay, thanks.